welcome back to Houston Sports Talk. Stephanie Stradley, you know her better from the Houston Chronicle as the Texans chick. She blogs on the Chronicle, and it's great to have her with us again. And since we last spoke to you, Stephanie, the Texans have a coach, free agent additions, and 7 rounds worth of draft picks. We'll start with the draft. What did you make of the Texans draft as a whole?
Well, they certainly stuck to what their board was and did not look at some of the things that people said in national boards, such as you have to take a quarterback in the first round. Heck, they didn't believe that they had to take one in the second or the third round. And there were ones available up high like that. So the question was, okay, I guess Bill O'Brien said what he meant, which is, you can't just look at the top 3, that all of the quarterbacks have strengths and weaknesses, and that he saw a little separation between a lot of the different prospects in this draft. And, sometimes that's just posturing when coaches say that, but apparently it wasn't in this case.
Yeah, we could talk about all the other positions, Stephanie, but it's going to come back to the quarterback over and over again. And RG and I were discussing the best case scenario for a quarterback pick between rounds 4 and 7. And he mentioned guys like Matt Castle and Ryan Fitzpatrick. What other guys did you mention, RG, in that category?
Since the Tom Brady pick in the 6th round, you're looking at guys from the 4th round and higher who've made it, the most successful ones being David Garrard, Kyle Orton, Matt Castle, and Ryan Fitzpatrick, those type of quarterbacks. And then there's, of course, the undrafted Tony Romo, who's probably the best of that bunch, but he wasn't selected. So that's kind of what you're looking at as more of a developmental pick. And not to say that somebody can't become a premier quarterback, but judging by those numbers over the years.
Well, I think part of the issue at that is it's an extremely small sample size in that when you watch quarterbacks at camp, there's only a certain number of reps to go around. So it's really hard for somebody who is undrafted or a lower round guy or guy that was just picked off the street to really compete and show, okay, I'm getting enough reps to show what I can do, because even the best quarterbacks, even the quarterbacks that are picked in the first round make mistakes. You're likely going to have more patience with those mistakes if you have a large monetary investment in the position. Part of the issue with lower round guys being able to shine is they don't have opportunities, and we don't have, developmental leagues where they can get training. And so it's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. You need the coach to be behind you and have patience in your development if you're a quarterback. And some of those people, like a Tony Romo or a Tom Brady, were in very peculiar situations where they had the opportunity to shine, but it could have gone a completely different way. Kurt Warner is the illustration of the quirkiest career path that you could possibly have. And, just a thing here or there could have made that just not happen at all. The difficulty of this is it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You draft somebody in the first round and you have more patience with them. And as it relates to a player like David Carr, you have too much patience, with them. I like looking at statistics probably more than the average football fan, but I do feel some reluctance in saying, well, quarterback drafted in this and such round traditionally has, this, that, or the other thing in terms of success. And a lot of that is opportunity. The NFL is a league of opportunity, and getting those opportunities from the quarterback position is particularly difficult.
Well, let's look at Tom Savage as a quarterback, though, the pick that the Texans took in the 4th round. Yeah, obviously, he has the big arm. He has the great arm strength. That's why he kind of rose up the charts right before the draft. But he spent his freshman year at Rutgers, then transferred to Arizona, and finally finished up at Pittsburgh, and really only had a freshman and senior season where you could look at his statistics. They weren't mind-blowing. What are your impressions of him as a quarterback prospect?
Well, I think in some ways his journey is a little bit like Tom Brady, who didn't get maybe the opportunities that he wanted in college, but has basically the commonalities are that they have the size. They're not phenomenal athletes in terms of, speed, strength, kind of like that new breed of athletic quarterback that people look at. I mean, he's more of a traditional quarterback. They're both smart players. So that's something that O'Brien put a premium on. Of course, there's all sorts of potential. If you look at some of the game tape that's out there, you can see what the coaches were looking at, where you see this guy who, really doesn't have the best offensive line. I mean, the offensive line for Pitt that last year, I mean, he has people in his kitchen right away on a lot of those plays. And then you see the next play, and he's heaving it down the field with a throw that you don't see many NFL quarterbacks being able to do. So the question with Tom Savage is he a piece of clay that can be molded into the type of quarterback that Bill O'Brien wants? Or is he one of these big arm guys that never really can get developed, kind of being like, sometimes when a basketball center grows up really fast early on, he doesn't have to learn the skills of basketball so well because he's just bigger than everybody else. But then it kind of catches up with him later on where he doesn't have some of the mobility that a player of a shorter stature would have to develop just to be able to compete. And so the question is, can Tom Savage be molded, or is it just something like where he's relied on his big arm for so long and he can't really develop those additional skills?
You also wonder about a guy that really has had no major success in college to come into the NFL and things change there. And you understand that there's situations, the offensive line in Pittsburgh wasn't good and that sort of thing. But it's pretty unusual for a guy to just be a very mediocre at best player as far as his college numbers and then come into the NFL and become something great. And what you really need if you're the Texans is something great.
I think if you look traditionally into the quarterbacks that have had franchise quarterback success, they've been successful on the lower level and they have a lot of game experience. So it's not something like where they're being surprised. But then you have other situations like a Tom Brady who did not have a lot of college success, but because he was able to shine on the next level and catch someone's eye, was able to kind of develop over time. And, he was not a finished product when he first came out. I mean, those early Patriot teams were more about some tremendous defense and having a complementary running game, and that he just kind of developed into that role over time. Now, I guess this is an ultimate test of, is Bill O'Brien's reputation of being a quarterback developer legitimate? Can he scheme his way through things? Because it's not as though this particular draft got him some, speeding wide receiver or, any kind of highly touted skill positions. He's going to have to manufacture an offense with really less experience at the quarterback position than they even had last year.
From everything we hear and what we know after the draft, Brooks Reed is moving inside to middle linebacker. It's one of the minor things through the Texans offseason, but what do you hear about that move? How difficult is it, and will it work? There don't seem to be many other options right now for the Texans at middle linebacker.
Yeah, I think one of the huge issues last year was that they were very thin at that position, even when Brian Cushing was healthy. And, they moved him to inside linebacker last year in camp just because Cushing wasn't practicing and quite frankly, they didn't have enough bodies. And they wanted to try him out at that spot because in Wade Phillips's offense, traditionally outside linebacker was a position where you could get some flashy stats, but those weren't particularly happening with Brooks Reed. So if you're not getting that production from the pass rushing perspective, and you also are incorporating a Whitney Merciless, you might as well try and see what you can get and see if having Brian Cushing and Brooks Reed in the middle gives you, a physical presence that helps you out. And really, I think this staff is looking to see how can we get our best front seven on the field, not necessarily, we're going to call this person this or that, but, how can we put players on the field that are able to do a variety of things? Because, Romeo Crennel has had experience in the past lining up guys in a variety of positions. It'll be curious to see what they have. Now, I can tell you, even with the vet mini camp that they had last week, I can tell you it looked like there was so much hands-on linebacker coaching going on, probably more than I've ever seen. And I think a lot of that comes down to just the energy that Vrabel brings as one of the new linebacker coaches.
The secondary had a lot of issues last season. Outside of a scheme change and a couple of late-round picks, the only major change was swapping Daniel Manning for Chris Clemens in free agency. How did you feel about the secondary situation going into the season? I assume Clowney might help, the beefed-up defensive line might help, but the secondary is still basically the same that you're working with.
Usually when a team is as terrible as the Texans were last year, they have extra cap money to spend. And that's not the Texans. They don't have a lot of money to spend in free agency. And the thought is, okay, yeah, maybe if we can improve the front seven, that improves the secondary. Jonathan Joseph was not healthy last year and had offseason surgery to help his toe. And I don't know exactly when he's supposed to be back on the field. I don't know if that there's been a timetable, but you would hope that a healthier Jonathan Joseph would help those things. But I think part of the issue is 2012, a lot of times the Texans offense was ahead in games, and that put the defense in a better situation. In 2013, a lot of the defense was on the field quite a lot. And the longer that a defense is on the field, the more opportunities that they have to be exposed. And really the pass rush wasn't, by the end of the year, wasn't anything more than J.J. Watt and a bunch of people that really weren't helping him much.
Just looking at the draft here and all the draft picks, went over Jadeveon Clowney, the obvious one, but is there somebody else, maybe a player or two that caught your attention that the Texans drafted that you're really interested to see come training camp in July?
The Texans had a lot of holes, and across the board, I guess the theme of this entire draft is just kind of getting beefier. The Kubiak Texans, fair or not, had a reputation of being more of a finesse team. And they were very eager to make sure that their offensive linemen didn't put on too much weight. And so sometimes they would get in matchups where they were out-physicaled. It's hard not to be excited by having the larger bodies at the nose tackle position, for example, with Lewis Nix. The Texans have never taken a nose tackle that early that is of that size. And then they've already gotten somebody in Jarrell Poe on the roster, who's also a bigger guy in the middle. And you could see situations where, especially when teams were, pretty much running at will when the Texans were behind in games and they couldn't do anything about it. If you're more stout in the middle and you can stop the run, then you force teams into passing situations. And that's when, quarterbacks can get in trouble. And it will be interesting to see who do teams double team now with this new Texans lineup. I wouldn't want to have to scheme against that.
What do you think possibly, you were saying earlier that, this is a team that's still rebuilding. Is that what you believe as well, too? This is going to be a rebuilding season, or what Bob McNair said, no, we're still a playoff team, potentially. Where do you fall in this?
I think that the history of not being settled at the quarterback position typically doesn't lead to a good result. I think the best things that the Texans have going for them this year, as opposed to last year, is that yes, they still play in the AFC South. The AFC South is still fairly unsettled. They will have an easier schedule than last year. They started last year with one of the tougher schedules in the league, and they played a ton of playoff teams last year. This year, the number of playoff teams that they're expected to face is less. And, in a parity league, your actual strength of schedule is a big difference. Now, we won't know what the actual strength of schedule is until the season's played. But if you just project based on what you've seen last year, it looks like it's going to be one of the easier schedules in the league. So that gives some chance for help. But typically speaking, if you don't have a franchise quarterback or even average quarterback play, you are doomed. And Bill O'Brien has never been an NFL head coach and has never installed a scheme from scratch in the NFL. Now, he was my first choice out of the likely available choices as a head coach, mostly because of his ability to develop quarterbacks, but that's just projecting. We don't know until it happens.
You have a unique connection with Texans fans, being with your social media and everything that you do with the Chronicle as well. Give us an idea. What do you think the Texans fans, what is their expectation going into next season?
I think it's all over the place. I think that there's some people who believe that last year's Texans were undercoached and poorly coached. And so if you just took this great roster and gave it better coaching, it'll get completely turned around. Then there's the other point of view, which is the past coaches were reasonably decent coaches. It was a roster issue. And, you can't make chicken salad out of chicken beaks. That they may be out, really searching for an identity for a while because they've lost a lot of leadership on the team. I think there's as many opinions out there as there are Texan fans. And then there's the group of Texan fans who are very disappointed that they didn't get one of the higher picks to develop in the draft.
The one position besides the quarterback that I don't think is decided as far as the starter is concerned looks to be the right tackle. Who would be your guess as the right tackle next season? I know Quisenberry is a guy that a lot of people are pretty high on from last year's draft.
I think that is wide open. They're trying out different people in that spot. Brendan Williams has not suited up even in the veteran mini camp, and I'm not sure when we're going to see him back on the field. I think it is wide open, and I don't think this staff is as focused on kind of positional certainty. I think the previous staff was like, okay, this is what, here are the attributes of a right tackle. Here's the attributes of a guard and so forth. I think this staff wants whoever the best 5 linemen are, let's put them on the field.
Just out of curiosity, how do you watch the draft, Stephanie? Do you sit there? Are you taking notes? Are you watching it all the way through? Are you in and out? How did you watch the NFL draft?
Let's see. I went to the draft party the first night just because it's probably like one of the last opportunities you get to see a lot of people that you know before the year begins. And it's interesting to see kind of the reaction at the scene, because sometimes how it's reported is not the way it felt when you're in the middle of it. And then the rest, I think I pretty much watched the whole thing. I made a point of doing work around the house that allowed me to do that kind of multitask. So I kind of multitasked myself through the draft.
How did the draft party turn out? Was it a success? Did you enjoy it there? Did it live up to your expectations?
Yeah, it was, I've been going most years. I've been continuously since 2006. And what was surprising to me was I think people knew that Clowney was going to be the pick, and there was a lot of support for that. There was a couple of people that showed their support for Manziel, but there was actually booing for him, which I was not expecting.
What about when Manziel fell throughout the draft? Were Texans fans equally intrigued by that?
I think most of the fans that were being vocal were being happy that he wasn't being drafted by the Texans. There were a few that wanted him to be drafted. I will say that once he was drafted, the party pretty much cleared out, but that got kind of late, and they had shut down the bar. So, when the bar is shut down, then it's hard to keep the party going.
Yeah, usually when Manziel shows up, the party's just getting started, so that's unusual. So just wanted to thank you so much for joining us, Stephanie, again. A great pleasure to have you on. Good to talk about actual players and stuff as opposed to just speculation, too.
Well, sure, and I think the biggest change that we're going to see in the future is though Bill O'Brien is very polite and very engaging, he's very Bill Belichickian when it comes to things like reporting injuries or talking about players who are not playing. So I think fans are going to have to get used to not having detailed injury reports or discussions of why isn't this guy out here.
Well, I've got some injuries to report myself, I think. I don't know. Well, that was Stephanie Stradley, a.k.a. the Texans Chick. You can catch your stuff on the Houston Chronicle, chron.com, as well as check her out on Twitter at Steph Stradley. Check out more of our podcast and much more on HoustonSportsTalk.net.